Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, today you are about to hear a perspective that many fear to speak and even fewer dare to understand. What if I told you that what you've been watching, hearing, and believing about the recent attack on Israel only scratches the surface? What if behind every headline, every image, and every political statement lies a deeper, uncomfortable truth? One that exposes not just the pain of a nation, but the selective outrage of a world. This is not just a speech, it's a wake-up call. Because we're not here to entertain emotions or repeat what the media has already told you. We are here to ask the questions no one dares to ask, to look at the damage, the loss, the fear, and then go beyond it. To understand what this conflict really costs, not just Israel, but the entire human conscience. So I ask you, listen not with your ears, but with your mind. Watch not with your eyes, but with your heart. Because by the end of this speech, I promise you, something inside you will change. You will not see war the same way. You will not see justice the same way. You will not remain silent the same way. Let's begin. The first keynote revolves around the casualties and civilian impact resulting from the attack on Israel. To understand this fully, we must approach the issue not only from a numerical or political standpoint, but also through the lens of humanity, ethics, and historical patterns of conflict. When an attack occurs, whether on Israel, Gaza, or any conflict-prone region, the question that arises is not just how many died, but who died, why they died, and how the world responded to their deaths. Numbers are not just statistics. Each number represents a life, a soul, a family, and a story cut short. In the context of the Israeli conflict, the civilian toll always becomes the centerpiece of emotional, media, and political manipulation. In the most recent attack on Israel, a number of Israeli civilians lost their lives. Among them were men and women, children and the elderly, citizens who had no direct involvement in the military or in state policy decisions. Their deaths were tragic, unnecessary, and deserve to be condemned by anyone who believes in justice and human dignity. Innocent life in Islam and in universal moral code is sacred. The Quran in Surah Al-Ma'idah 532 says, "Whoever kills a soul unless for a soul or for corruption in the land, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely." This clearly emphasizes the gravity of taking even one innocent life. Therefore, those who carried out the attack that killed innocent Israelis bear responsibility for their actions before God and before humanity. However, here lies the complexity and the hypocrisy. When similar or even larger numbers of Palestinian civilians are killed, often in response to these attacks, the world does not react with the same urgency, the same emotion, or the same coverage. Why is it that when a child in Israel is killed, it dominates headlines, but when an entire family in Gaza is buried under rubble, it is reduced to a statistic or a side note? This disparity in empathy, in coverage, and in outrage reveals a deeply embedded bias in the global consciousness, particularly in the media and political discourse shaped by the West. The issue is not that Israeli lives are mourned, because they should be, but that Palestinian lives are often not mourned at all, or worse, are justified as collateral damage. Take, for example, the numbers. When the attack on Israel happened, it was reported almost minute by minute with graphic details of how many Israelis were killed or wounded. Social media platforms flooded timelines with personal stories, pictures of the victims, messages of solidarity from world leaders. Yet, when Israel retaliated with massive airstrikes on Gaza, destroying apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, and killing hundreds of civilians, including children, the world, while noticing, did not echo the same level of collective grief. The media often presented these deaths in passive language, rather than Palestinians died in airstrikes, rather than Palestinians were killed by Israeli airstrikes. This subtle shift in language frames the Palestinian as a faceless casualty, while the Israeli is personalized and humanized. This is not accidental. It is part of a systemic narrative that dehumanizes one side while sanctifying the other. Let's go deeper. Civilian impact is not just about deaths, but about the fear, trauma, and psychological scars left behind. Israeli citizens, especially in the south, have lived under the fear of rocket attacks for years. Children grow up knowing the sound of sirens, rehearsing bomb-sheltered drills. Their trauma is real and must not be denied. But imagine living in Gaza, where there is no functioning Iron Dome to intercept incoming missiles, no safe bomb shelters, and no place to flee when airstrikes begin. For every siren in Tel Aviv, there are drones buzzing over Gaza 24/7. For every minute of fear in an Israeli town, there is a lifetime of siege, blockade, and bombardment in Gaza. Trauma is not one-sided, yet the global conversation often pretends that it is. Beyond the psychological impact, the damage to civilian life in terms of health, education, and daily survival is catastrophic, especially for Palestinians. In Gaza, repeated attacks and ongoing blockades have crippled hospitals. There are reports of babies dying in incubators due to power outages. Doctors operate in darkness with little to no medical supplies. Clean water is a luxury, and electricity is sporadic. When attacks occur, schools are turned into shelters if they aren't bombed first. The ripple effects of each attack are generational. Children orphaned, families displaced, dreams shattered. These are not side effects. These are deliberate outcomes of an asymmetric power structure where civilians pay the price for political and military games. We must also talk about the intent and proportionality, two key concepts in international law and ethics. When a military strike targets a residential building in Gaza because a suspected militant is inside and 30 civilians are killed in the process, is that proportional? Is that moral? When Israel is attacked and responds with overwhelming force, leveling entire neighborhoods in retaliation for rocket fire, can we truly say both sides are equal in their civilian suffering? The intentional or reckless endangerment of civilians on either side must be condemned, but the international system often excuses disproportionate responses if they come from states rather than from non-state actors. This moral inconsistency not only fuels further violence, but also strips the oppressed of any avenue for justice. Moreover, the casualty narrative is often manipulated to shift blame. When civilians die in Israel, the blame is clear, placed on those who carried out the attack. But when civilians die in Gaza, the blame is often redirected back at the Palestinians themselves. Hamas uses human shields. They fire from populated areas, or they bring this upon themselves. While it is true that militant tactics can endanger civilians, it is dangerously disingenuous to use this as an excuse to bomb entire apartment complexes. International law still holds occupying forces and militaries accountable for protecting civilian life, regardless of the tactics of their enemies. What about the long-term consequences of civilian casualties? Every child who sees his parents killed becomes a potential radical. Every woman who loses her home and her husband loses faith in a system that claims to value human rights. Violence begets violence, and every civilian casualty is not just a moment of pain, but a seed of future resistance or extremism. Civilian impact, therefore, is not confined to the present. It is an investment in future. If peace is the goal, then minimizing civilian harm must be the primary focus, not just in words, but in policies and actions. Another element of the civilian impact is displacement. In both Israel and the Palestinian territories, civilians are often forced to flee their homes during attacks. However, the scale is vastly different. In Gaza, entire families live as refugees in their own land, some for generations. When an attack occurs, they have nowhere to go. UN shelters overflow, and yet even those have been bombed in previous conflicts. In contrast, Israeli citizens often have access to shelters, safe zones, and the backing of one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. Again, this does not make their suffering any less, but it does highlight the uneven playing field that shapes the civilian experience. Let us not forget that the impact of these casualties extends to the diaspora communities around the world. Jewish and Muslim communities globally are affected emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes even physically through rising hate crimes. Each attack stokes division not only in the Middle East, but in the hearts of millions around the world. The media narrative, depending on how it portrays the victims and aggressors, influences public opinion and fuels hatred or compassion. Civilian casualties are not just local tragedies, they become global symbols in the ideological wars of our time. In conclusion, while the attack on Israel caused undeniable civilian suffering and trauma, it is vital to place this within the broader context of ongoing occupation, repeated military escalations, and the enduring asymmetry of power. Civilian suffering must never be one-sided in our eyes. If we are to truly value human life, then every child's death must weigh equally on our conscience, whether they died in Tel Aviv or in Gaza City. Only when we humanize all civilians, regardless of their nationality or religion, can we begin to hope for justice, peace, and a meaningful end to this cycle of bloodshed. The second keynote revolves around the economic and structural damage that Israel suffered during the attack. When a nation comes under military assault, the immediate concern is often human casualties, which rightly demand attention. However, in a comprehensive analysis, the economic and infrastructural consequences of such attacks are also critical to understand, as they affect the nation's stability, resilience, and capacity to recover and respond. In the case of the attack on Israel, while it is a militarily advanced and economically robust nation, the level of structural damage inflicted during this assault was significant and cannot be underestimated. The attack led to direct hits on several important military bases and installations. These are not merely buildings or pieces of land, but represent core strategic assets that support the country's defense capabilities. Military infrastructure includes radar systems, surveillance technology, missile interception systems, air bases, and command centers. Damaging such infrastructure reduces not only the country's defense capabilities in the short term, but also sends a message that even one of the most secure states in the region is vulnerable. Repairing or replacing such systems is not only financially burdensome, but also requires time, during which the nation's sense of security is shaken. The cost of a single Iron Dome missile interception, for example, is in the range of $40,000, 0 cents to $100,000, 0 cents. And when hundreds of rockets are intercepted in a short period, the economic toll rapidly escalates. Beyond the cost of interception, the very systems themselves must be maintained, reloaded, and in some cases repaired or recalibrated after overload, which adds a secondary layer of economic pressure. Moreover, economic infrastructure was significantly impacted during the attack. This includes roads, bridges, factories, energy pipelines, and water supply systems. In areas where rockets landed or drone attacks occurred, the destruction disrupted local economies. Businesses were forced to shut down, sometimes indefinitely, due to damage or fear of further attacks. Commercial zones in cities such as Ashkelon, Sderot, and even outskirts of Tel Aviv saw significant disruption. Power stations were forced to divert resources or temporarily halt operations. These interruptions affect not only the business owners, but the employees who depend on daily wages, supply chains that feed into the national economy, and services essential to the public. When businesses close, supply contracts break, investments stall, and the GDP takes a hit. The direct cost is evident in the form of damages and repairs, but the indirect costs in lost productivity, broken trade flows, and diminished investor confidence can sometimes outweigh the initial damages. A central part of the damage was also psychological, but with economic implications. Financial markets react to instability with volatility. Israel, being a hub of technological innovation and home to numerous multinational companies and startups, saw a temporary downturn in financial confidence. Stocks of defense contractors might rise, but broader sectors like tourism, retail, and hospitality suffer immensely. Israel's tourism industry, which thrives on both religious and recreational tourism, experiences sharp declines during periods of military escalation. Cancelled flights, empty hotels, and closed tourist attractions translate into millions of dollars in losses within days. Tour operators and small businesses that depend on foreign tourists suffer severely. Travel warnings issued by other countries, insurance complications, and security fears make it harder for the industry to bounce back quickly. In agricultural zones near the Gaza border, farmers have long dealt with the fear of rocket fire. During the attack, many fields were left unattended, irrigation systems were damaged, and harvesting was delayed or stopped altogether. For a country that heavily invests in agricultural technology and exports produce to international markets, this represents a blow not just in terms of food security but also in terms of international trade relationships. Export contracts must be met, and when a country defaults or delays due to conflict, future deals may be jeopardized. Another crucial area of damage was in the housing and civil infrastructure sectors. Residential buildings in areas under attack sustained various levels of destruction. While many modern buildings in Israel are reinforced against rocket attacks, they are not indestructible. Direct hits caused building collapses, structural weakening, broken windows, shattered pipelines, and fires. The process of repairing, reinforcing, and sometimes relocating entire families from damaged or destroyed housing is economically intensive. The government has to allocate emergency funds, mobilize civil defense units, and coordinate with construction companies to carry out repairs or complete rebuilds. Insurance companies must process a surge in claims, which, while compensating some losses, also destabilizes the industry temporarily and leads to increased premiums. The schooling system was also affected. Educational institutions were closed, sometimes converted into emergency shelters, and students were forced into remote learning environments. This not only interrupts academic progress, but also places an economic burden on families and the state. Parents are forced to stay home from work to care for children, affecting workplace productivity. Emergency educational setups cost money and strain the resources of the education ministry. In areas affected by the attack, local governments must reallocate budgets from development programs to crisis management, slowing down long-term projects that support urban growth and community development. The transportation network also suffered. Roads were blocked, public transportation was halted in many regions, and highways were either closed for military reasons or damaged. This not only affects civilian life but also hampers economic logistics. Movement of goods, especially time-sensitive items like perishable food or medical supplies, becomes restricted or delayed. Transportation companies incur additional costs, delivery timelines are disrupted, and consumer satisfaction is diminished. In some sectors, particularly logistics and retail, such disruptions can lead to revenue losses that take weeks or months to recover from. The telecom and cyber sectors face challenges during the attack as well. Although Israel is known for its advanced cybersecurity systems, attacks, both physical and cyber, can compromise communication networks. Internet outages, damaged data centers, or targeted cyber intrusions can disrupt businesses that depend on digital infrastructure. Given that Israel is a tech-savvy nation with significant investment in startups and digital economy, even minor disruptions in this sector can have ripple effects across international markets, where Israeli firms play a crucial role. Furthermore, the military mobilization required during and after the attack places a tremendous financial burden on the state. Reservists are called up, logistics are activated, ammunition is expended, and defense systems operate at full capacity. Each day of military readiness costs millions. The state must fund not only direct defense activities but also emergency health care, psychological support for affected civilians, and post-attack economic stabilization measures. The budget is stretched, often requiring reallocation from social services or public infrastructure programs. This means long-term developmental goals are delayed, affecting national progress on multiple fronts. Another economic aspect is the impact on foreign investment. Investors seek stability, and even though Israel remains a technologically innovative nation, repeated attacks and military escalations shake investor confidence. Projects may be paused, withdrawn, or redirected to safer markets. Startups struggle to secure funding rounds, and large companies reconsider expansion plans, this affects job creation, GDP growth, and the general business climate. The image of a nation constantly under attack, regardless of its strength or resilience, does not bode well for economic optimism. On a broader geopolitical level, economic ties with regional partners are strained during such conflicts. Trade relations with neighboring countries, especially those recently normalized under agreements like the Abraham Accords, can be affected. Business people from other nations may hesitate to engage due to fear of reputational risk or logistical complications. Diplomatic tension spills into economic cooperation, which in turn slows regional integration and mutual economic benefit. Lastly, the cost of rebuilding and compensating victims is an ongoing economic commitment. Governments set up funds for affected citizens, insurance payouts are coordinated, and NGOs become involved in relief work. While these efforts are necessary and compassionate, they do consume resources that might otherwise be used for innovation, infrastructure, or welfare. Rebuilding after an attack is not a one-time event, but a drawn-out process involving assessment, budgeting, allocation, and execution, all of which cost time and money. In summary, the economic and structural damage from the attack on Israel is extensive, affecting everything from military readiness and civilian infrastructure to education, agriculture, business, transportation, cyber systems, and international investment. Even though Israel is a country with robust systems and emergency response capabilities, the cumulative economic impact of such an attack cannot be overlooked. It strains the national budget, affects civilian life, damages long-term development prospects, and shakes regional stability. In conclusion, the attack on Israel caused far-reaching damage, not just in terms of human casualties, but in its profound economic, structural, and psychological consequences. Innocent lives were lost, military and civilian infrastructure were disrupted, and the nation's sense of security was deeply shaken. While it is essential to acknowledge the suffering experienced, it is equally important to understand the broader implications and double standards that often frame such events. True justice and peace can only emerge when every innocent life is valued equally and when responses are guided not by power or politics, but by principle and humanity. Let us not be selective in our outrage, nor blinded by bias in our compassion. Every life lost is a tragedy, and every act of destruction, no matter where it occurs, must be measured with truth, justice, and moral clarity. May Allah grant us the wisdom to see beyond media narratives, the courage to speak the truth with balance, and the strength to stand for the oppressed without fear or favor. Thank you for listening with an open mind and heart. May peace and blessings be upon all those who strive for justice. Good luck in your journey of seeking knowledge and standing for truth. Jazakum Allahu khairan.